Okay, everybody, welcome to tonight's District 5 United meeting. Thank you for joining tonight. We have a presentation about preserving open space via Measure T, a Census 2020 update, and Captain Jason Ta from the San Jose Police Department, who will provide information and take questions and provide answers. And now I'll go ahead and hand it off to Kat.
Thank you, Juan. My name is Kat Baumgartner-Wilson. I'm the campaign manager for Measure T. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm going to share my screen. Our external affairs manager from the Open Space Authority, Marc Landgraf, is going to present. And actually, he's here tonight as a private citizen, just on behalf of the campaign. So he'll get into that in a moment. So, and then also, if we have time at the very end of the presentation, the last slide basically kind of talks about ways that you can help the campaign. And I'll follow up in the chat box with some links and phone banks and some other information that I have that would be great if you could take a look at. So thank you very much, and hang on one second.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Good evening. Thanks very much, Juan, for inviting us, and for D5 United. We'll try to make this pretty fast-paced so that we get all the information out and that there's time to answer questions. And then I know you have other items on your agenda for tonight anyway. So as Kat mentioned, my name is Marc Landgraf. I'm the External Affairs Manager with the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, but as she also said correctly, that tonight I'm here as a volunteer with the Yes on T campaign. So not here on behalf of the agency at all. So I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about the work that the Open Space Authority has been doing in our region, especially in D5, and talk about what Measure T is so that you have that information. I want to start by just mentioning this beautiful picture, an overhead shot of Laguna Seca, is at the northern end of Coyote Valley in San Jose. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with it. Ron, I know you're very familiar with it. You take some absolutely beautiful pictures in that area and elsewhere. But this freshwater wetland and about 800 acres surrounding it were recently protected by the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority and its partners, thanks to funding the agency receives from Measure Q. And Measure Q is a funding measure that was approved by voters in 2014. I'll provide a little more information about that here shortly. But I just want to mention, there aren't a lot of open spaces left in Silicon Valley, but we're really fortunate to have a well-run agency like the Open Space Authority and its partners, of course, to protect the best of what's left. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kat. Wildlife abound in Coyote Valley and the surrounding hillsides. The Thule elk in this picture on the left is part of a herd that roams Coyote Ridge and the hills and valleys to the east. But elk, mountain lions, coyote, bobcats, and other wildlife need protected natural habitat to survive. Many of them also need protected lands that are linked together, such as through northern Coyote Valley, which links the Diablo Mountains in the east to the Santa Cruz Mountains in the west, and until recently was threatened by development, which would have completely cut off this vital link for large mammals and those animals that are part of that greater wildlife resource. So next slide, please, Kat. Speaking of trails, the map on the left shows the preserves in dark green that the Open Space Authority operates for walking, hiking, mountain biking, bird watching, etc., free of charge, 365 days a year. You can see the mission of the organization to the right, which you may already be familiar with, but I wanted to point out that the Open Space Authority, which is a public agency, was born out of a group of concerned citizens that saw the need to protect the most important lands around Silicon Valley at a time when lands were rapidly being converted to other uses, due in large part to explosive growth of industry in the Silicon Valley and need for housing. Individuals can make a difference, and the valiant efforts of these individuals resulted in 1993 in the formation of the agency that has had such a large positive impact on the 1.4 million residents it serves. And serve it does. Kat, next slide, please. As you're probably all aware, there has been a steeply increased demand for access to the outdoors during the COVID-19 crisis, as it's a safe way for people to get exercise for their physical and mental health. Along with that, there's been an increased awareness in the public about the importance of nature in their lives. You know, something that people have often thought about and realized, but maybe subconsciously, and it's just come to the forefront quite a bit more lately. So more than ever, we need to work together to protect our open spaces and access to trails, and even expand that access where we can. Kat, next slide, please. So a big part of the reason we're here tonight, of course, is to tell you about Measure T that appears on your ballot on November 3rd. Measure T is a renewal of Measure Q that was passed overwhelmingly with more than 2/3 of the voters passing it in 2014. That measure from 2014 provides the Open Space Authority currently with 2/3 of its base operating funding that allows it to do its important work. Measure T doesn't increase taxes. It's a renewal of the existing $24 per parcel annual tax. So that tax amount would not change. And all Measure T does is renew the existing tax until ended by voters. Next slide, please. For just a minute, let's talk about some of the work that the Open Space Authority has done with your $2 per month over the past 6 years. So what we've got, just a few highlights agency-wide for what Measure Q has accomplished here on this slide. It's doubled the acreage protected to over 26,000 acres. In fact, I don't know if you all saw the news that just came out in the Mercury News 2 days ago about the Tilton Ranch that made that total even greater. And while the Tilton Ranch isn't currently owned by the Open Space Authority, it's managed by that agency and will be owned by them in the future. So it's part of the overall protection total. And as we mentioned before, nearly 1,000 acres were protected in North Coyote Valley. We have kept open 26 miles of trails for more than 300,000 visitors annually. And that's in a normal year. This, of course, has been anything but a normal year. And this year, the amount of visitation has swelled to more than double that, more than 600,000 folks, even before the end of the year. The authority has also invested over $3 million in 30 community projects to connect people to nature. And I'll talk about some specific examples in D5 here shortly, and has connected over 21,000 people throughout its jurisdiction to nature through environmental education that goes out to families and school kids. Next slide, please. So this map shows the nearly 300 projects that the Open Space Authority completed since 2014 with that $24 per parcel tax from Measure Q. Each acorn represents land protected or an outdoor education facility or a trail that's been constructed, a community garden, an environmental education program that's been delivered. All sorts of really innovative and impactful projects developed by community organizations, schools, cities, or the county. Next slide, please. So specific to D5, I really wanted to point out a number of things here. So starting with back in 2015, so a year after Measure Q passed, because of the strong support that urban populations showed for passing Measure Q, the Open Space Authority undertook a study about the demographics within its jurisdiction, which includes the cities of San Jose, Milpitas, Campbell, Santa Clara, Morgan Hill, and everything that's unincorporated in the county. But as well, the study also looked at those areas that, those barriers that prevented people from accessing nature in the urban areas. And so through that study, there were certain areas that had much higher perceived barriers to access of nature. Things like language and cultural barriers, economic barriers, and transportation barriers, just the lack of access to parks, other burdens that people, especially in underserved communities, are suffering from, that specifically prevents them from accessing nature that can be such a healthful aspect of their lives. And so the report, called Understanding Our Community, identified the East Side as a deep engagement community, being an area that the agency would focus on for urban investments because of those greater barriers to access of nature. Since that report came out, many of the investments that the Open Space Authority has made in its urban areas have been in the form of grants. So I mentioned a few examples before of what kind of work the agency does through its grants. But here specifically, I wanted to mention a couple of grants that went to Vegilution. If some of you are familiar with that organization, that it's a nonprofit that operates out of the city's Emma Prush Park at the intersection of 101 and 280. And $100,000 went to Vegilution in 2018 to expand their urban farm programs, with a big focus on teaching kids where nutritious food comes from and how to grow it. Another grant went to Valley Verde, which is located just outside the border of D5, but serves clients within D5, and was awarded $45,000 in a grant in 2018 for their San Jose Home Garden project, helping families increase food security by growing vegetables in their yards or on their balconies. Joseph George Middle School in the Alum Rock neighborhood received $25,000 from the Measure Q grant program for construction of a community garden. And then the Open Space Authority also provides its own environmental education programming, and at 6 different schools in East San Jose within D5, Measure Q funded program delivery there at those schools for school students as well. In addition, I just wanted to mention Sierra Vista Open Space Preserve, and Kat, if you could go to the next slide, please, which is just uphill and adjacent to Alum Rock City Park, which is a wonderful historic park just above the Alum Rock neighborhood. And the Open Space Authority entered into an agreement with the city several years ago to co-manage these parks using best skills from both agencies, and that way saving taxpayer dollars quite a bit of money by partnering up. So this just a second here. Yeah, so one thing I additionally wanted to point out as I kind of conclude my remarks here about Measure T, and then would open it up for questions, is that here we're starting to show who has already expressed support for Measure T. And those expressions of support continue to come in, but lots of organizations, many of which here on the list you may recognize. And then on the next slide, we've got some elected leaders, including Councilmember Carrasco, and we thank her very much for her endorsement of Measure T, as well as Mayor Liccardo and others on the list. And then, of course, individuals such as yourselves who are also very supportive of the work that we do. And Ron Horry, I see your name on the list here. Thank you for your endorsement as well. So with that, I wanted to then kick it over to Kat to talk about the campaign itself a little bit more and how you could help.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I'm going to share this last screen here. I love this last slide, Mark. So little birdie told you how you can help here. This last slide here, if you guys can all see it. So just some real quick and easy ways that you can help the campaign is to follow us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram there. I will put those links in the chat box so you can have them for later. But I post just about every day. So if you could share that with your networks, that would be great. And then, you know, as you know, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we're just trying to respect the health guidelines and suggestions of, you know, not really interacting with people. So we're not knocking on doors, but we are calling people, and that is the best way that you can reach out to voters and help us. So if you do have some time, you know, an hour or two, we've got 2 phone banks that are coming up, one tomorrow, Thursday, with the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and the California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara County chapter. And then another one with Sunrise Silicon Valley. They are a youth, one of the many youth environmental organizations that we're very proud and excited to partner with. They're hosting a phone bank on Saturday. And those are 2 signups right there. Again, I'll put that in the chat box, but that's all I have here.
Now we wanted to go into questions and answers.
So I heard you talking about the Joseph George School and that grant funding was given to it to do some work. I'm just wondering if the seismic reports were included in the discussion. They actually were planning on some buildings there. They had to cancel all of that because it's literally surrounded by seismic faults, and they're not quite sure what they can do there. So just wondering, I mean, you're giving them money to do a public space thing.
Absolutely. That is a really good question, and I don't have a good answer for you. I'm not aware of the seismic report having been made part of the grant review process. What I can say is that the school was awarded that grant in 2017. And so I'm not sure when the seismic report came out, if it was
Well,
after
that would have been right about the same time.
Oh, okay.
I was on the bond oversight committee at the time, and they were canceling the one of the buildings they had been planning to build there because of that. So
Okay. Well, if it's all right, I mean, I don't want to mislead you with anything I don't actually know. So I'd be happy to get back to you once I can find out whether, you know, the garden was successful or whether it was also halted because of the seismic issues.
good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get back to you.
All right, and are there any other questions? Let me see. Just double checking.
Actually, and looking at Measure T, I did have one other question.
Okay.
So it says that what you're asking is that we continue the parcel tax for an undetermined amount of years until the taxpayers cancel it.
Mhm.
That's what the measure is?
That's correct. It's until ended by voters. So presumably if the voters don't wish to end it, if they like the work that we're doing, then it would continue indefinitely.
Okay.
And I mean, I can talk a little bit more about that, but did you have a
Yeah, I would like to hear more about that because I wouldn't understand why we would set parcel tax that would have no set end.
Right. No, it's a good question. And we have received that question before. And typically, parcel taxes, bond measures, et cetera, they tend to have a sunset, you know, a specific dollar amount that's been allocated. And currently, Measure Q has a 15-year sunset, and it would end in 2029. So the idea behind Measure T is that because our Measure Q, that $8 million a year, represents 2/3 of our base operating funds. We really need that just to keep the preserves open to the public and to continue providing grants to the urban areas, just the way we're doing, not even to increase the services that we're providing. And, you know, because we've invested, we and partners and the state of California and the city of San Jose have invested in protection of these lands and opening them to the public for public benefit, we feel that to make good on that commitment to the public in perpetuity, there needs to be funding in perpetuity that we can rely on that and plan for the future. So that's the whole idea behind it. I know sometimes it makes people uncomfortable if there's funding without a specific end in sight, but it's different than many measures that seek to remove sunsets because it's really just part of our base funding that keeps I want to say keep the doors open, but it's really keeping the trails open at the preserves and keeps the land stewardship going in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking the question.
All right, and then my 2 cents on that is just that at $2 a month, it seems like a great deal. That's just my 2 cents. Ronald, I think you had a question. I'll go ahead and read the question. I saw it in the chat. Mark, can you comment on the difference between Measure Q-T and assessment number 1? Both appear on property tax bills.
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for the question, Ron. So as I mentioned, Measure T is a renewal of Measure Q, so they're essentially both related to that $8 million a year. That represents 2/3 of our annual budget. Assessment number one that Ron is referring to in the question is the other 1/3 of our annual funding, which is around $4 million a year. And that is a benefit assessment district that was established shortly after our agency was formed in 1993. And for several years after that founding, we were operating on $4 million a year. So that is also, like we're hoping to accomplish with Measure T, a non-sunsetting funding source. It's renewed by our board of directors every year, but unless our board of directors decides to cancel it, it continues indefinitely. And so that is a benefit assessment district that is a mechanism that's really no longer available to us because of state propositions that have passed since then. But fortunately, it still provides 1/3 of the annual funding that we use.
All right, I think those are all the questions. Thank you again for presenting, providing information